What's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. We are back on the live stream for YouTube and back on your podcasting feed after about a 10-day vacation for myself. Hard to find the right time to take those, but wanted to take advantage of that and kind of rest up a little bit before the football season. If you guys are new here, I'm your host, Max Torres. And I am joined today by my good friend, Spencer McLaughlin. He is the host of the Locked on Ducks podcast. I've been on his show a bunch, so figured it'd be fun to bring him on my show. We're going to be doing a live stream talking about Oregon football and Oregon football recruiting. So if you guys have some questions, make sure you hop in that live chat and throw them our way. We're going to do our best to get to as many as possible. Want to make this show for you guys, the fans. But with all that being said, Spencer, how we doing, man? Hope you're having a good day. Glad to have you back.
We're doing just fine. It's good to be on with you. I think based on the number of appearances you've made on my show for free, I only owe you about 4 of these. So happy to come on.
Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah, it's going to be a fun time. We got no shortage of things to talk about here as recruiting is definitely ramping up here in the month of June for a lot of teams, but particularly for Oregon. Obviously, that's our focus here on the Ducks Dish podcast. The first half of the month was pretty dormant. Not a whole lot going on, but man, we got some big visitors that are coming to Eugene this weekend, and we're going to talk about some of those big names here on this episode. We're going to be talking about the quarterback recruiting picture in 2023, and then we're also going to be taking viewer questions. Steezy PDX is hopping in here saying, "What's up? Thanks for coming on and being around, man." He's a longtime viewer of the show, but let's get into our first story here. And I think it's a big one. Reports coming out today, Friday, June 17th, as we record this. The report comes from Zach Blostein of Knowles 24/7. He reported that Oregon safety Damon David, who had made the decision to enter the transfer portal back in the spring, has had a change of heart, and he will be returning to Eugene to play his sophomore season. And, man, you got to figure this is some good news for Dan Lanning and company.
Yeah, I think this is Dan Lanning's superpower, is snagging guys out of the portal who are wanting to leave the program. I mean, obviously there have been a handful of transfers since the new staff took over, but you go back and remember the first recruiting victory, so to speak, that Dan Lanning had was Seven McGee, because he was in the portal, and then Lanning and Kenny Dillingham convinced him to stay, and now he figures to be a prominent player in the office. Sean Dollars was in the portal, and then I think he accidentally got entered in the portal a second time, but he was going to leave, and then they convinced him to stay, which I'm really glad about, because I think of the Oregon running backs right now, he's got the best physical traits. Doesn't mean he's necessarily going to be the number one, but I think that he's got the highest ceiling, but he does have to stay healthy, of course. And now you see it with Damon David at a position that was starting to look a little thin. I talked about on my show recently the impact of the Cody DeCambra commitment, because I think that's kind of an area of need going forward, is the defensive secondary, just looking at not just getting bodies back there, but having talent back there as well. And to have talent back there, sometimes you need to have a bunch of bodies, because maybe one guy comes in as a decently rated recruit and he doesn't end up panning out the way that you were hoping he was going to. And that's just kind of part of the game that we play in college sports, is not everybody pans out. So anytime you have a guy like Damon David, who hasn't played a ton, but from what we've seen so far, he looks like he can be a capable player. We don't know what his ceiling really is at this point in time. He wasn't some giant heralded recruit or anything, but he's a guy that you'd rather have on your roster than not. And certainly if you're a team like Oregon that is looking a little bit thin on the back end of the defense, and it's just having a lot of turnover there. I mean, you lose 3 of the 4 starters from a season ago, essentially. I mean, you have Bennett Williams and Jamal Hill back, but they were, often in sub packages. And Bennett Williams, of course, was hurt for a good portion of last season, unfortunately, because he was playing really well. So good to have him back. Hope he stays healthy. But you got no Mikael Wright. You got no DJ James. You got no Verone McKinley. That's just a lot of continuity to lose. And so at some point, and it's a lot of production as well, and at some point you want to try and establish who that next core is going to be. And there's no guarantee that Damon David will be that, but I think he was a guy who we've had our eye on for the last year or so, looking at potential fill-ins for a player like Verone McKinley, who's going to play at the back end of the defense. So I think it's great that, players have the option to do this, but I think it's even better than that Oregon coaches are able to convince them to come back, even if they, go through the process and think about it, say, I think it's in my best interest to transfer. But then these coaches are, on multiple occasions showing they're able to go these guys and say, no, your best option is still probably here, and we believe you can do this. And so I think it's good news all around.
Never hurts to have more options to work with, especially when you have a new coaching staff. Matt
Right.
Powledge inheriting that safety room and the co-defensive coordinator duties on Dan Lanning's new staff in Eugene. You already talked about a couple of those guys that were there last year. I think Jamal Hill is someone that I think it has something to prove this year, especially at safety. He really came on strong and in the 2019 season, and had that great game against USC in the Pac-12 championship game, and then I think last season left a little bit to be desired. Had some lapses in coverage, but is still one of the better players in that safety room. Huge to have Bennett Williams back after losing him for a lot of that 2021 season. Like you mentioned, he's definitely the biggest playmaker right now in that secondary, I would say. Probably not too much of a stretch there. But for Damon, he's actually someone who saw a decent amount of playing time last year as a true freshman. Appeared in 9 games for the Ducks, 3 total tackles. All of them were solo. He's someone that really shot up the recruiting rankings, I think, on the back end of his recruitment. Eventually ended up earning 4-star status, really made a name for himself as a hard hitter. You get him back, which is also a good thing because he's another Baltimore area native with Dante Thornton. So I'm sure those two guys being, really close friends, duking it out in high school out there in Maryland, they're excited to be together again. But for me, Spencer, I think that I'd say that the cornerback room needs a little bit more of a boost in the safety room right now. I think I'm a little bit more confident in the safeties right now rather than the corners. But this is definitely not bad news by any stretch of the imagination. It's good to have a guy like Damon back with that familiarity of the college level, because not only do you have a new staff getting into put in place here, but you got new guys coming to college, some new faces mixing in with the returners. And I think for the most part, you want to give yourself some solid options that are guys that have played before, understand the Pac-12 layout, and have adjusted to the speed of the game, because that's one of those things that you really can't adjust to unless you're out there playing.
Yeah, and I think you could actually argue either side of the safeties versus corners department, because guys like Jamal Hill and Bennett Williams are, I think, officially listed as safeties. They're kind of in between players. They're not purely going to line up, all the way at the back end of the defense, but sometimes you can bring them down and have them be in a nickel or a dime package and kind of play that slot corner position, from time to time. I think primarily they operate as safeties. But the thing that I look at is, when talking about the safeties at the back end of a defense, I think your free safety is more important than your strong safety, because he's kind of the field general back there, and he's the guy who's covering the most space, and he's the guy who's preventing the big plays. He's your last line of defense, and I think losing Verone is such a massive loss from a production standpoint and a leadership standpoint, that replacing that is really, really difficult. Even though you have guys like Jamal and Bennett, who we know are able to make plays and be good players, I don't think either of them are the sort of ball hawking leaders at the back end of the defense that Verone was for, the last couple seasons, coming on really strong as a first team All-American in 2021. And then the cornerback room, I think you similarly have, some lack of experience, but you also have Christian Gonzalez there. And I'm actually really high on him. I think even higher than most. I think he's been kind of quiet this spring, and he was kind of quiet in the spring game. But when you're talking about corners, different than safeties, when you're talking about corners, a lot of times not hearing from a guy is usually a good thing, because that means that the ball is just not coming his way very often. And he was an all Pac-12 honorable mention performer a season ago, so he knows how to perform in this conference and at the Power 5 level and be a good player. So I'm sold on him at this point in time. We'll see if it clicks with regards to the defensive philosophy this year, because sometimes that can, make guys not fit in the way that they were thinking. But with Demetrius Martin coming over from Colorado to Oregon, I don't suspect that's going to be much of an issue. So I think that's the most sure player that we have in the secondary right now from a coverage standpoint. I think Jamal and Bennett both do a lot of their damage kind of working in between the sticks and coming up and popping guys. And yeah, they can make some plays in coverage every now and then. But if you're talking about man-to-man locking on, as Mikey G is saying in the comments there, I think that's got to be the guy who we look to as our top corner, who's going to cover their best wide receiver. And in theory, you'd like it to be Dante Manning, but he has really struggled, from especially from the point of view where you consider that he's a 5-star recruit. Like, that's supposed to be a big time guy who locks on right away. He has not performed the way that I think Oregon fans were hoping. So that's a question mark. But I think looking at that free safety slot, is it going to be Brian Addison? Is it going to be, I think Triquez Bridges is a little bit more of a strong safety mold, but maybe he can, be more of a roamer there on the back end. I think there's a lot of questions at both slots, but the only guy right now that I'd say, I know that he's going to be one of the 4 or 5 starting DBs consistently on the field all the time, I think is Gonzalez, because Bennett and Jamal, I think, are both going to be there plenty, but I think they'll rotate in and out a lot more than Gonzo will.
And Gonzo, in an ideal world, he's that plug and play guy, right? You want him to be your cornerback one. It's kind of a weird situation for Oregon. You don't really find yourself you don't like to find yourself in the position of like, hey, we lost our top 2 corners from last season, and now we need to go out and find a guy that can be that CB1, that can be that lockdown guy for the opposing team's number 1 wideout. You ideally want to have him already on the roster, but this is just a situation where you're a program, and you have guys like Jalen Davies who left. I thought that was a move that kind of surprised some people. He didn't see too much action while he was at Oregon, but he
looked good in the Alamo Bowl, though.
Yeah, he had the opportunity. I thought he was in line to really kind of step in and at least compete for the opening spots that were vacated by Micah Wright and DJ James's departures. But another guy that I haven't even really mentioned, I'm glad you talked about him in your answer there, was Triquez Bridges at safety. He's someone who came to Oregon as a safety, moved to corner. We all know that story. We don't have to talk about it too much. I think that he probably didn't have the season that he wanted to have. Was he someone that didn't have good plays? No, not at all. I think he was a guy that certainly grew into a better comfort at the position as the season wore on. But you kind of had that I don't know if I'd call it a battle, but it was a battle between Dante and Triquez for that cornerback 2, cornerback 3 spot that DJ James kind of ultimately took. And you kind of had Triquez and Dante rotating throughout the season. Neither guy really, really solidified themselves as a consistent contributor. But Dante, I think he was battling injury. He has battled injury since he's been here, which was definitely a bummer for him. But he's a guy who comes to Oregon as one of the most highly touted DBs that they've recruited in recent years. Super explosive, twitchy, speedy guy. I think he's someone in that cornerback room that has some of the biggest expectations for this year as someone that they're hoping can step up. So you got Gonzo, Dante. We'll see if Triquez ends up going back to safety. That's kind of what the indications were throughout spring, but the defensive staff was saying they were really moving everybody around because when you're a new staff, new scheme, you want to kind of experiment. That's the beauty of spring ball. You get to try different things out and see who fits best where. Brian Addison, another guy that I think he's kind of entering a little bit of a, I don't know if I want to call it a make or break season, but he's been here for a while. He came here in the 2018 class after originally committed to UCLA, was kind of one of those just physical freak guys. If you don't see a whole lot of 6'5" DBs, I think he was like a top 10 athlete in that class coming out of Sarah Gardena in the Southern California area. But he made a really good play in spring ball that we all talked about with his one-handed interception in practice. So seems like things might kind of be falling into place for him. But someone else we also haven't even talked about, 2 other guys really. JJ Greenfield comes back, rejoins the team after playing some JUCO ball last year, and then the Ducks get Donovan Dalton, the Hawaii transfer. who's 6'4". We're talking about just tremendous length that you have in the secondary now for Oregon between guys like Addison, Triquez, and Dalton. And then we also have a new crop of guys coming in this 2022 class. Jaleel Florence joins the team for spring ball as an early enrollee. That was huge. Kind of hard to see the benefits, the fruits of that just yet because it's so early, but he had an awesome interception against Isaiah Crocker in that spring game. So you're already seeing some good results there. And then you have the other Jaleel Florence coming in. And then you have Trajan Williams and Kamari Terrell that are going to be joining the team this summer. So I think that there's definitely some reason for optimism, but just to bring it back to this Damon news, I think it's great. You just want to have as much experience as you can, especially in the secondary, because that's a really hard position to adjust to. I think more so corner than safety, maybe. You can make the argument for either one, I think, just because you have some of those general duties with the last line of defense. But man, I'm just kind of getting a little bit more confidence in this Oregon secondary as time goes on. But really going to be hard to say too much until we can get to fall camp, see who's moving, how people are moving, and then ultimately that first test against Georgia isn't going to be easy with that crazy skill talent they got there.
Yeah, and that interception that Jaleel Florence made in the spring game was I think pretty cool to see, because he was slightly beat on the play, but he didn't give up on it. And one thing I saw, he also got beat by Dante Thornton streaking down the sideline for a long touchdown. But when I watch Florence, and we haven't seen Tucker yet because he's not coming till later, but Florence, I think, is just a guy, and Tucker, an absolute speedster. He runs like 10.53 in the 100-meter dash. He's got absolute blazing wheels. But I thought Florence, going out there as a true freshman, his first real exposure to college ball, he looked like he belonged. Does he need some coaching perhaps? Well, yeah, everybody does, especially at a position like that. And I don't think it's at a place where he needs to play immediately. But would I be surprised if he's on the field for a small handful of snaps every now and then in Pac-12 conference play? Not at all, because I just think he's, got the size, the frame, and the athleticism to be able to compete with guys out there and hang with them. He just needs to be able to kind of hone in those skills a little bit. But I think when looking at the secondary, I'm going to feel a lot better about it in 2023, I think, than this year. I have a number of questions. Can Dante Manning take a leap? Who's going to play free safety? How much are we going to see Jamal Hill and Bennett Williams on the field? Are they going to be able to stay healthy? Are they going to, there's just, I think, more questions than answers there. But after another season, maybe Manning decides to leave and go to the NFL, but he would have to have one heck of a season this year, I think, to do that. So let's say he's back and Gonzo is back, and then you talk about all these guys you're bringing back on the back end of that defense as well. You lose Bennett Williams, maybe lose Jamal Hill, but you have a guy like Damon David there, Steve Steven in the mix, JJ Greenfield as well. I think that, once you play a full season together, you really start to get that continuity. And I think that's really important for a secondary, kind of like quarterbacks and wide receivers. You have to have that chemistry with one another to anticipate, how a guy's going to play this coverage, or how is he going to play that route, or when we're in zone, when do we pass stuff off? Those sort of things matter a lot more than, say, on the defensive line, where I think you can just have a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau come in as a big time recruit and just make an impact right away. But it doesn't require as much time to gel, but I think the secondary does. So that's why I think it's a little bit of a question mark going into this year, but next season and, in the coming years as well, with guys like DeCambra and Cole Martin coming down the pipeline as recruits, I feel good about where that position group is headed.
Yeah, I think Oregon's had young guys break into the fold early, and they're having more and more each year, I feel like, which is a sign that the recruiting is paying off. Because I think you can have all these amazing players coming to Oregon or whatever school you're at, but ultimately they're not coming to sit. You want to get those guys in the mix right away. You want to get guys that are so good, they're pushing veterans for playing time right away. In the secondary, we saw that with Javon Holland being the most prominent example, I think. He really made a name for himself right when he stepped on campus out of that 2018 class. Now he's balling with the Dolphins in the NFL. Yeah. And then you saw Diamondor Lenore play a decent amount as a freshman or an underclassman. And then Thomas Graham was really thrown into the fire as a corner during kind of the the rebuilding days when, coming off that 4-8 season, he was really thrown into the fire, and they didn't
Mikhail
really
Wright
have that many options.
Yeah, Mikhail Wright played a lot as a freshman too.
Yep. Yep. So I think maybe, with all that being said, I think Oregon could be due to have one of these young guys break out really early. But anything else you wanted to talk about, just about this Damon David news, or anything in the secondary before we move on to our next topic?
I think the name that we've skipped over that I'm sure someone has noticed by now is Avante Dickerson,
Sure.
who's also a really highly rated 4-star when he came out of high school, and he's seen some action already, so he has that edge over some guys, like the Jaleels, or maybe even Damon David, frankly, where he's just been on the field for more meaningful snaps. And, he hasn't wowed me, but he also hasn't made me go, I don't know if he's going to have it yet. So I think that's another guy who could push for maybe a CB2 slot, behind or opposite Gonzo, I should say. I think right now you would think Dante Manning is in the lead, but Dante Manning's been burned a lot so far in his college career, and he has not lived up to the hype to this point. He's got the best physical gifts of anyone in that secondary, I think probably at any position, but it's different when you're talking about putting it all together, understanding schemes, understanding route concepts, and your fundamentals as a corner and all the little stuff, when to turn your hips, when to use this leverage, when to anticipate, this route or jump it and all that sort of stuff. And I think he struggled with those elements so far because he looks the part when you see him out there, but he hasn't put it all together yet. So I would imagine he's in the lead, and his injury is not expected to be serious. He's probably even close to being back to 100% by this point in time, because that was back in spring ball and it was considered pretty minor. So I think if he's able to take a leap, it's his, but I wouldn't sleep on Avante Dickerson as a guy who comes in a nickel and dime, sub package where you're in a 3rd and 11, they're going to throw, and you don't want to put Jamal Hill out there maybe, or Bennett Williams, because they're a little bit bigger. They're not quite as agile. I think you'd see a name like Avante Dickerson.
Another guy to watch in that secondary is Darren Barkins, who got to run that 40-yard dash against some fans at the spring game. But I feel like we've hit on a lot of really good stuff there. So Damon David will return to Oregon for his sophomore season after seeing action in 9 games as a true freshman in 2021. Let's transition to our next topic on the show. Just a quick reminder, guys, if you're here watching live on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres, go ahead and smash that like button for us and subscribe to the channel. Only takes a second out of your day, and it is a tremendous help as we work to build the channel and build the community here covering Oregon football and Oregon sports. Just recently passed the 1,500 marker with subscribers. So big shout out to all the supporters. Appreciate you guys for everything. But with that being said, let's talk about this weekend. The Oregon Ducks will be hosting a very impressive collection of talent here for the weekend of June 17th, 18th, as officials and unofficials really ramp up here in the month of June. Majority of July is a quiet period, so there's not going to be a whole lot of visitors going on for the Ducks next month, which is why you really want to try to put in a ton of work now here in June, maybe even try to get some of these guys wrapped up and committed to the Ducks in an ideal world, right? So what we're going to do now, Spencer and I are going to hit on some of the big recruits that are in town this weekend. We're not going to hit on all of them, but I'm going to be working on a more in-depth visitor list on Ducks Digest later this afternoon, this evening. So make sure you guys stay tuned for that. But we're going to touch on some of the biggest names here that have either announced that they're going to be coming to Eugene this weekend, or I've personally confirmed with them that, or with some sources, that they're going to be here. I think one of the biggest ones that we really have to start with, we're not going to be talking too much about the quarterback picture this second, because that's another section in the show, but Avery Johnson, the Kansas quarterback, 2023 guy out of Mays, Elite 11 quarterback. He is in Eugene. He got in for his official visit last night. So things are rocking and rolling right now for Oregon as they really try to make their best pitch for Avery Johnson, who really came on strong here in the 2023 cycle for Oregon. And what's interesting with him, Spencer, is that he wants to wrap this thing up sooner than later. He talked to our John Garcia, who's the director of recruiting at Sports Illustrated. You guys obviously know him pretty well. I've had him on my show. He's been on your show a million times. So John's the man. But when he talked to him at the Elite 11 in Nashville, I believe it was, he was very, very transparent, saying, I want to be committed by the time I make it out to the Elite 11, which I think is set for June 28th, or certainly just the end of this month. So, we don't have to say a whole lot when we're just emphasizing how big of a visit this is for Johnson and for Oregon, because you ultimately want to get that quarterback in the fold sooner rather than later. And I mean, Kansas State has been showing him tons of love, and man, it'd be a great deal for Oregon. I know that they're very high on him, but he's not the only guy that they're going after, as we'll talk about here on this show. So big visitor with Avery Johnson coming into town.
Yeah, and he's a guy who is not going to wow you necessarily with his with his arm per se. He's not quite as gifted in that sense as like a Jaden Rashada, or going back a ways, a Nico, or a Dante Moore. The two of those guys still very much in Oregon's sight. Well, Avery and Dante now, and Jaden they're no longer in the mix for, but he's listed as a true dual threat, and that's very, very true. He's got like 4.5-ish speed, and just for reference, I believe Mariota's 40 time back in the day was about a 4.55 ish. So that gives you a sense of what sort of athlete and player he is. And this is the way that it works in recruiting. It's not like Oregon is the only program who's recruiting guys hard, or hitting the trail, or talking to players and giving them a bunch of incentives and reasons to come to their school. And so you're not going to win every single battle out there. And was it slightly disappointing that the Ducks didn't make the cut for a California native in Jaden Rashada? Yeah, it was. But is it the end of the world? No, because the way that you have to look at it, and the way that the staff, I'm sure, is looking at it, is like, all right, we wanted him, we put time in there, was not time wasted, but we're on to the next. And Avery Johnson, Dante Moore are those sorts of guys. Mikey's saying that everything I've heard about Avery makes me prefer him over Moore. I like Avery because he's just a tremendous athlete, and I think he opens up some possibilities that Dante wouldn't give you. I had a chance to talk to Dante last weekend. As a person, he's very impressive, and as a quarterback, he's a much purer thrower of the ball. So I think it's kind of decision time there for Kenny Dillingham. And you'd probably never be able to get an answer out of him, but I would love to ask him the question: which of those two guys better fits what you want to do offensively? And this is the first time we all know that Dillingham's been the full-time play caller, where he's kind of given the reins to the offense. He doesn't have an offensive head coach looking over his shoulder. It's just him. And so he gets to make that side of the ball in his own vision. And I wonder which of the two he would prefer. If I were an offensive coordinator, depending on what my philosophy was, I could justify taking one guy or the other. If I wanted to go a little bit more air raid, I might lead towards Dante Moore. But if I wanted to be a little bit more RPO based, where my quarterback's going to move a lot the way he has for the last couple of years with Joe Moorhead, then I might want to go with a guy like Avery Johnson, who is supremely agile and nimble, but is not going to wow you with his arm talent. So I think both are solid options and present a good amount of upside. And it's good that Oregon is, getting a visit in there. And I can't remember, Max, maybe of one. The last recruit Oregon was getting out of the state of Kansas, or at least heavily considering out of the state of Kansas. I mean, that's not exactly what you'd call a recruiting hotbed, but every now and then you can find a diamond in the rough down there. And that's certainly what Avery looks to be.
Yeah, I think for that, the only person I can think of, and it might even be cheating a little bit. I'm looking up
You are cheating.
I'm looking this up and trying to do some research on the fly. But the person that comes to mind for me that the Ducks were in pretty significant consideration for is Jermaine Johnson, the defensive lineman that just got drafted by the Jets out of Georgia. He originally, I don't remember where he was coming out of Minnesota for high school, but he went to Independence Community College, which is one of the most recent Last Chance U, not the most recent, but a recent Last Chance U school. So Independence Community College is in Montgomery County, Kansas. So I don't think he's a Kansas native, but I'll throw him out there as a possible answer to that. But as far as what you were saying about Avery, man, I mean, the dude's just super athletic. I think what's interesting about him is that he's a little bit more slight of frame. When you're just looking at him from a physical build, 247 has him listed at 6'2", 170. So definitely on the lighter side. But I mean, you saw how that paid off for him. I'm just looking at his huddle right now, and he has some stats here. I don't have my other monitor, so I can't put his stats up on the screen right now. But as a junior, in 2021, threw for just over 2,500 yards, 20 passing touchdowns against 6 interceptions, and then ran for over 1,000 yards, 22 rushing touchdowns. That's more than 3,600 yards of total offense at a completion rate of 56%. Usually you want that in a healthier range of about 60 to 65 is kind of what I would be hoping for. But you can see the upside with having a more mobile guy, right? That's just the direction that college football is going. You want to have a guy that has really nimble feet, that has good footwork, that can improvise and be mobile. And I think that Dante Moore has that as well. But obviously I think he has a little bit more of the college ready frame when you're just looking at his build at 6'2", 195, 200 area. But we're going to be talking more about the quarterback picture a little bit later in the show. So I don't want to talk about Avery too much, but I think he's kind of one of the headliners for this weekend when it comes to Oregon as far as who they're getting on campus. But the other guys that I want to talk about here, a couple other guys, man, the state of Texas, that Lone Star State is very well represented this weekend for Oregon with their visitors. A lot of the guys that we're talking about here so far, all of them actually are 2023s. They have some 2024s, but I'm more focused on the 2023s right now. So you got Avery, who we just talked about. He's not from Texas, but he's a big visitor. And then you got wide receiver Jonte Cook. He's out of DeSoto High School in the Dallas area of Texas. I actually got to see him in person last fall when I was out there in DeSoto covering Stephon Johnson, who was formerly committed to Oregon. But Jonte really stole the show, man. He is just an absolute showstopper, super, super agile, really a big playmaker. Recently got bumped up to 5-star status. So you just see how he's really just picking up more steam on the recruiting trail. I think that guys like Matt Pallage, even though he's not a wide receiver guy, he's kind of been the representative of Texas recruiting for Oregon. So I think that he's really been prioritized. The Ducks might already have their crown jewel at wide receiver in this class with Jurion Dickey, the Northern California wide receiver in the 2023 class, who just every time you hear about him, man, every time you see him, I saw him at camp a couple weeks ago. He just keeps ascending, man. He's just getting so much praise, making a name for himself, just showing up and competing. And I think there's buzz that he might even receive 5-star status. So that's pretty huge to get him, Ashton Kozart. And then now, hey, I mean, you're getting your chance with an official visit from Jonte Cook.
Yeah, Dickey's stock is just going. It's just up. It keeps going up. He was the day 2 MVP down at OT7 last weekend in Las Vegas. I had a chance to go out there on Saturday and Sunday and watch some games out there. Talk to a couple of the guys, including Jurion, who's very, very low key, very laid back guy, not super chatty, but a really nice dude. But when he gets on the field, he just shows you so much, and it reminds me a little bit of that scene in Moneyball when they're doing the flashback to when Billy Beane was a player in high school, and the scout from the Mets is saying, we're looking to find a player who's got 1 or 2 tools and then develop another one, and your son has 5, and that's kind of what Jurion represents as a wide receiver. Normally, you can foresee him being a slot guy or a speed guy or a deep threat or this and that, right? Like you look at a guy like Ashton Kozart, talented player, but he's going to be the sort of dude who's going to go over the top, right? That's kind of his specialty. But Jurion, I'm not clear what he can't do. He's 6'1", he's built, so you're not going to push him around. You don't need to line him up behind another receiver or use motion to get him a clean release. He's built. He can run after the catch. He can go deep, catch contested balls. He runs the route tree very well. His agility is really fast. I could see him as somebody you give a tunnel screen to and let him weave through the defense because he's so quick. But I mean, he can go 0 through 9 on the route tree and run them all at a high level. And when I was watching, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he gets bumped up to a 5-star. And though I know, because I asked him about, why he wanted to go to Oregon, why he chose Oregon, and he was very, very quick to say two things. Number one, he grew up watching Oregon, and that was something that he's known for a long time that he'd be interested in. But number two, he talked about, he thinks that's the best spot for him and his family, and he just kept going back to that. And, I was, kind of poking and prodding, trying to see if there was something else, but he just said, I felt like that was the best spot for me. And, they were, really good to us, and it was just a good deal for him and his family, and whatever, he sees as that in terms of how important that is. It was clearly at the forefront, and he felt that Oregon is the best place. But I think the Ducks have to really stay tied into his recruitment, because you have to remember, these are all verbal commitments. Nobody has signed an NLI yet, not an NIL, but an NLI, National Letter of Intent. And Jurion Dickey, I think, is a guy who's going to get a lot of looks from other schools who are going to come into the fold and say, hey, we know you're committed to Oregon, but we want to have you out here for a visitor. I'd love to talk to you about why my school is actually the right one, and I do think Miami is going to be among them.
All right. Yeah, we could certainly. I mean, it makes sense, right? Mario Cristobal was definitely recruiting him when he was the coach in Eugene. So I'm right there with you. I think that he's certain. I mean, it goes for all of these guys, right? I think just maybe to varying degrees. How willing are other schools going to be to keep knocking on their door after they've already made the commitment? Because sometimes there's the deal where guys commit and then other schools just respect it, and it's like, hey, I mean, we've tried, but we just really can't get anywhere with this guy. He's as locked in as you get. So that kind of goes for, the whole class. We got to recruit guys after they've committed. And then now with the age of the transfer portal, you got to recruit guys even after they enroll. So it's just a crazy deal when it comes to, today's college football. But we're talking about some more visitors here on the Ducks Just podcast. Want to talk about Jonte Cook a little bit more before we get to a quick break, Spencer. But just to get people up to speed real quick on Jonte, he's been taking a lot of visits in the spring. A couple of his official visits that he's already taken. We're looking at Michigan. We're looking at Ole Miss. And then Michigan State just recently offered. And then two other big schools that I think honestly have probably the best position right now. You got to look in-state at A&M and UT Austin at Texas. He's been a very vocal supporter of both of those schools, gets out to College Station and to Austin all the time for visits. So I feel like schools like that, I think, really have an edge, have a leg up in this recruitment. But this is why you bring guys out for visits, Spencer. You get them on campus, you build those relationships even more. They talk to your current players, who are oftentimes the best recruiters that you could ask for. I mean, how many times have we heard about Jackson Powers Johnson just being spoken highly of as a recruiter, just being around that infectious energy? And then we'll see what Oregon can do with guys like Kyler Casper, Chase Cota getting coached up, Dante Thornton, Troy Franklin. I mean, we can go on and on about the names that Oregon has, but Junior Adams and those guys have to go out on the field and prove it. But getting Jonte on campus certainly doesn't hurt you. And hopefully you can kind of put yourself in a good spot with him after getting him on campus. I don't believe he has a decision date at this time, but he's definitely well-versed with Oregon after he got recruited heavily by Brian McClendon when he was still at Oregon, and then when Stephon Johnson was committed to Oregon previously.
Yeah, and I think that I've talked about this with John Garcia before on my show, Locked On Ducks, and one advantage that Oregon has going into, a state like Texas, the disadvantage is that it's a long way from home. When a kid from the Dallas area or from Katy, Texas, or, wherever, Plano, like there's all sorts of different places that you can look over the state and find a lot of talent. The disadvantage is it's a long way from home. Some guys might want to stay a little bit closer, be close to family and friends and whatnot, make it easy for them to come out to games. That's one thing. But one thing that we've discussed before is when Oregon is the outlier in a recruitment like this, it can be an advantage because it's a way for them to stick out and distinguish themselves. Because if you're a kid from the state of Texas, what's the major difference between Texas and Oklahoma you're going to find? I mean, there's a lot of similarities there, right? Or Texas and Texas A&M. Again, a lot of similarities. Or A&M and LSU. You're in a similar region. You've got, similar campuses, similar school. Like they're in the same conference for the most part, A&M and LSU and the SEC, or like Texas and Oklahoma in the Big 12, right? Those are ways that I think Oregon can have an advantage of coming in being the outside team that stands out in that sense. So it can be a drawback depending on the recruit and what his priorities are and what he wants for the next level of his career, college football. But I think it can definitely be an advantage as well because it's a way to stand out. You go on campus at Oregon and it's 65 degrees and sunny in the fall or in the summertime or whatever. That feels a lot different than when you go to College Station and it's 95 and the humidity is 83%. Like that sort of stuff. That's an important thing to remember in recruiting as well. Is these guys are going to play football, and what they see as the best avenue for them to continue their football career is a big part of their decision. But they're also figuring out where they're going to go to school, where they're going to live, right? They have a different lifestyle than most college kids, but there are a lot of similarities there too, right? So you think about, how you want to spend your free time, or what the dorms are like, or what they feel like. All that stuff does play into, right? Not as much, I think, as the football vision that you get from the coach, but that sort of stuff matters. And so I think Oregon can, distinguish itself in that way, and in some sense with these recruits. And I think that's, certainly the reason that we've been able to pull kids out of other states before, is because it's different. It's different. A lot of guys are, looking to go way away from home. Like Jaden Rashada clearly wants to go way away from home. He's from California. He is going to go to school nowhere near California, and clearly didn't want to stay on the West Coast. And that's a personal preference thing. It doesn't mean that Oregon did anything wrong in his recruitment. It means that some guys just, grow up in a certain part of the country and they're like, you know what, I do want something different. I want to see what else is out there, what this state is like or that state is like. And so I think that's an element of recruiting that's often overlooked. But I think when you look at Cook as a receiver, he's only 5'11". I mean, he's got blazing speed and he's got really good skills. I look at him and I see Chris Hudson 2.0, and I really like Chris Hudson. And not that Cook can't go on the outside, but he's probably going to be most effective in the slot. That's kind of what I think he projects as. He doesn't have that sort of frame like a Casper or a Thornton or even a Troy Franklin to be a big-bodied receiver on the outside. But I think that the way that he is able to use his twitchiness at the top of routes to create space, I think you line him up in the slot, and that's a tough guy to cover.
No doubt about it. I mean, going back to what you were saying real quick, just about how Oregon distinguishes themselves, or they're just different geographically from other places. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to guys and they tell me, man, I loved how green it was in Eugene. I loved the hills and the mountains because I don't see that where I'm from. So it's an underrated aspect. Dude,
Texas, Oklahoma. I lived in Oklahoma for just over a year. It's so different. It looks different. Everything is just flat. You have no mountains. The roads are flat. Everything is a flat drive everywhere you go, and it feels different just being there. And that's a very, very real thing.
No doubt about it. Yeah, when I went to Texas, like I talked about that trip, when I went to Ohio State to cover the Ducks in that game, that was the first thing I noticed. I'm like, this place is super flat.
Yeah.
But hey, nothing wrong with it. Just different than what we're used to out here on the West Coast. Hey, we're rocking and rolling. Gonna step away for just a second here to take a quick ad break, but make sure you guys stick around for this latest episode of the Ducks Dish podcast, talking about Oregon football and recruiting, working our way towards some questions on the other side. We got that coming your way next. Welcome back to the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres, talking with Locked On Ducks host Spencer McLaughlin. We're having an awesome time. We got a good amount of people here in the live chat and then the live stream. So a couple more guys. Here's what I was thinking, Spencer. I think we're probably going to go over the hour mark, so I wanted to make sure that was okay with you before we got there.
Oh, yeah.
But a couple more guys I want to talk about that are on campus in Eugene this weekend. Want to talk about those recruits when I really sink my teeth into the quarterback recruiting picture in 2023, and then get to some of these questions that honestly I thought we were going to get to a lot sooner, but we've had a lot of great conversations, so I don't want to slow that down at all. So let's talk about a couple more of these Lone Star State guys in the 23 class. So we talked about Jonte Cook, and then you also have David Hicks, the number one defensive lineman in the 2023 class. The Ducks have done their homework on this one and are in a great spot after getting them on campus in the spring for an unofficial visit. Now they have them on campus this weekend for an official visit. You see some other schools that are heavily in the mix here, with A&M being one of them. Miami was another one I believe I saw him at recently. Michigan State, Mel Tucker's trying to make some noise there. He also had Jaden Wayne out on a visit recently. So Michigan State's, I think, kind of a, I don't know if I go as far as saying a sleeping giant, but they're definitely doing some things the right way out there in East Lansing. So David DJ Hicks gets to campus for Oregon, and he's got to be a massive priority for Tony Tuioti. Just they've had good defensive linemen at Oregon. I mean, it's hard to point to Kayvon Thibodeau because he's kind of one of those edge guys, those hybrid guys, not like a pure defensive lineman, but David Hicks is a pure defensive lineman. If you're just looking at his frame, 6'4", 270, not too likely to find him lining up out there on the edge, but he's coming out of Pato High School in Katy, and man, you got to think this would be a huge win for Dan Lanning and this staff, Tony Tuioti and the staff, just because as great as their offensive line recruiting has been, I just don't think they've gotten it done on the defensive line in the trenches, getting multiple guys, not just a Kayvon Thibodeau, and then this year, not just a Brandon Dorless. You just got to have that line stocked with guys that can make a difference. And man, David Hicks looks like one of those guys.
Yeah, and he's going to play, like you said, almost strictly on the interior. I think he's a more athletic version of a Jordan Scott, who's just a run stuffer. He can swallow up a double team. He moves the line of scrimmage around. He might not always be the most impactful player from a statistical standpoint, but if you watch the film and understand, how a defense works and how you slow an offense down, a guy like David Hicks is going to be right at the center, literally and metaphorically, of everything that you do. It's good that the Ducks are in a good spot with him, because my understanding throughout his recruitment is that Texas A&M has kind of had the inside track on him at this point in time, and he's from the state of Texas, and we know how well the Aggies have been recruiting just nationally, but also in that state for the last couple of years with Jimbo Fisher. So I would be pretty surprised, honestly, Max, if Oregon is able to get him, because I feel like he's a guy who's going to either stay in the state of Texas or find an SEC school. I would love for Oregon to get him. I think it would be absolutely massive, because you're right. We saw this past year the weakness of just having one premier defensive lineman. And when Thibodeau wasn't on the field, yeah, Dorless is good, but I wouldn't say Dorless is great. I know he grades really well in the Pac-12 as an interior defensive lineman, but from a pass rush standpoint, he's, solid, but he is not great the way that Thibodeau was. And so you're looking at the interior and looking at the edge prospects as well. You need to have multiple guys there who you can rely on, or who you feel in a big moment are going to be able to get in there and make a play. Because every time Thibodeau was off the field, there was no pass rush last year. I mean, Oregon was just lacking bodies. And I just think that if they can get a foundation on the defensive front that allows them to be as dominant and physical as we've ever seen, I think that's what Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy want to do defensively, because that's what they've seen over the years. That's what they've done over the years. If you can get pressure with 4, you open up a lot of options defensively, and that's something Oregon has really struggled with, because even when Thibodeau was there, he's only going to apply pressure when the other team makes a mistake and leaves him in a one-on-one. I mean, how many times was he double, or he was triple teamed a couple times against UCLA last season, or he gets chipped by a running back or tight end, because that he's, the premier guy that Oregon has had the last couple of years. So you got to have bodies up there, and David Hicks is somebody who you're not going to be able to leave in one-on-one all the time. And I think if you have a disruptor on the interior, that sets up your edge players to be able to have one-on-ones with tackles and create some pressure on the quarterback. But you got to have those players first, and Hicks would certainly be that sort of guy.
Yeah, staying on the front seven, really good points there, Spencer. Wanted to just keep it rolling here with some guys so we can get to questions here down the line. Colton Vasek, he's hopefully I'm saying that right. He's a 4-star edge out of Austin Westlake in Texas. Austin Westlake has just produced some guys at the next level. Look at Cade Klubnik, the former 5-star recruit that is now at Clemson. They won a 6A Division II Texas State title last year. Colton Vasek was named the defensive MVP. So this is just a guy that Oregon has really had on their radar for quite some time. A couple schools closer to home are definitely giving Oregon a run for their money. You got schools like Texas, you got Oklahoma also in the mix. I believe both those schools just got a visit from Vasek in the recent months. So I think that there's definitely some schools that are applying pressure here. But I think Oregon's in a better spot when it comes to Vasek as opposed to Hicks, just because they're probably more confident that they can hold off, that in-state push from Sark. Certainly for a defensive guy, right? This is where you see Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoi coming into play here, with him being kind of an outside linebacker edge kind of guy as far as his projection goes. Not to say that those guys won't be in play with like a DJ Hicks, but I just feel like he's a little bit more realistic for Oregon as far as what they've done previously, the work that they've put in. Getting him on campus is huge. This is an official visit for him, like with Hicks. So they're rolling out the red carpet to give their best pitch. And I think that this is someone who, again, I don't think has set a commitment date, but you're putting in that work now, making that solid impression to, hopefully get a commitment from him when the time comes. He's down to 5 when it comes to finalists that we're looking at. I'm trying to look here on the fly. You got Oregon, Oklahoma, Texas, Texas Tech, and Clemson. But the feeling here is that Oregon's in a really good spot.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we're still kind of waiting on. I think the offensive recruiting is surpassing expectations at this point, but the defensive verbal commitments haven't quite come at the rate that I think they eventually will. I think it's just been a little slower in that sense. But you think about the biggest recruits Oregon's landed so far. It's been Kyler Casper and Josh Connerly, and yeah, you have a Jaleel Florence in there as well, but you don't have that big time defensive player who you look at yet and go, oh, is that the next Thibodeau or Noah Sewell, who's just going to step in and be one of the best players on the field right away. I mean, the moment Thibodeau stepped on the field, you're like, oh yeah, that guy belongs immediately and might be our best pass rusher. And I remember when Noah Sewell first got on the field in 2020, I was like, he's a true freshman, and that is our best defensive player. And it's, maybe not particularly close outside of Thibodeau. So I'm still waiting to see who that's going to be. Maybe it'll be a Hicks. Maybe, Vasek is a guy who pops, or maybe it'll be a Jaden Wayne. Mateo Uiagalelei is in there as well. But, we give plenty of attention from a recruiting standpoint to the quarterbacks, because that's the premier position in all of sports, of course, and Oregon's still going after a few of them. But I think that Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoi are still waiting for that first big-time defensive recruit, and I wonder if that'll cause other guys to follow if and when that happens.
Yeah, I think the domino effect is something that's very real here. We've seen it time and time again, but it hasn't exactly happened with Oregon. They've gotten some big guys since Dan Lanning took over. But especially because some of them have been in the transfer portal, we don't see the domino effect as we maybe do more often in the high school level. But the thing is with their defensive line recruiting, I think that position in particular is the defensive front is just it's in a really good spot to skyrocket as far as the pieces that they have in place, the guys that are there, the coaches that are there, and the recruits that Oregon's going after, guys that are there now like Vasek, guys that are coming next weekend for the massive June 24th recruiting weekend. Mateo Uiagalelei, who's getting mentioned here in the comments. Jaden Wayne, who's another big-time target here. They're both going to be in Eugene next weekend. So want to shift a little bit now, Spencer, to talk a little bit more about the quarterback picture. Is the quarterback picture coming into focus for Oregon in 2023? I know we were getting some comments here in the live chat. And it was something I wanted to talk about anyway. So this is the kind of last topic that I want to get into before we see what you guys are talking about in the questions and the live chat a little bit more. Got a big update that we've kind of hit on a little bit earlier in the show, but Jaden Rashada, 5-star quarterback out of NorCal, is pushing back his commitment. to later this month in June. Had previously set his commitment date for June 18th, which is tomorrow. And then Avery Johnson is on campus now. So when they were still in the running, I was like, how is this going to work? Avery Johnson's on campus that same weekend, and Rashada wants to make his choice. I feel like if Oregon had to pick between one of the two, it'd probably likely go for Rashada. Not like a hot take there, but now that Rashada has narrowed his choices down to 5, Oregon's not in the mix. You got Ole Miss, LSU, Miami, Texas A&M, and Florida, I believe, as the 5 finalists. That he's not in the picture anymore. So now we want to talk about the guys who are still in the picture. You got Avery Johnson, who we've already talked about a lot on this episode of the podcast. I don't want to talk about him too much more. And then you have Dante Moore, who, man, just about a month ago, I feel like 2 months, it maybe wasn't as good of a shot for the Ducks. I feel like Marcus Freeman and the Irish out at Notre Dame really looked like they were in the lead for the longest time here. But Dante Moore is a really well-traveled quarterback. He's made it out, obviously, to Oregon. I think he made his official visit back in April. So good that they already have him on campus there. Maybe it's a situation where it's good that they already had their official visit from him versus getting it from Avery Johnson now. But he knows what Oregon has to offer. He made it out on campus. Moore did in January for an unofficial. So that's another thing that I think really helps, just getting quality guys on campus early and on their own dime in the unofficial capacity. So we got Moore also there. He's visiting Texas A&M this weekend. So we're seeing some overlap there as far as Rashada and Moore, their visits that they were taking. But that's big. And then you also have Ricky Collins, the Purdue quarterback commit. Haven't seen as much on him, but he does have an Oregon offer. The Ducks were also going after Aiden Childs, the Southern California prospect who has since committed to Oregon State. I feel like, the interest was definitely there from Childs, but maybe Oregon wasn't ready to, hop on board with him because you have some of these big guys that you're still in the running for. So it's definitely positive developments for Oregon that it looks like they're kind of trending or surging a little bit, if you want to call it that. Pick whatever word you want that is a positive one. And it looks like Oregon has a serious shot now when it comes to Dante Moore. But we talked about Avery Johnson wanting to make his commitment before the month wraps up. Moore is out at College Station right now for a visit, no commitment date. It kind of puts you in a little bit of a pickle when it comes to if one guy's ready to pop, but you're still kind of waiting and seeing with Moore.
Yeah, so, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, perhaps our Irish friend who's hopping in the chat, which we always appreciate, but I believe Notre Dame got a commitment from a quarterback not that long ago, and that's kind of what has catapulted Oregon forward in terms of their chances to land the 5-star quarterback. And I like him a lot. This was someone's question earlier, and it's kind of in the same vein. Of the quarterbacks who are left, who would we most want to have? I would take Dante Moore personally. It's not that I'm opposed to Avery Johnson. He can do a lot of really good things. I saw Dante Moore last weekend. He's on Cam Newton's 7-on-7 team, and they got all the way to the championship game, actually, and they lost to was SFE was the team name, led by USC commit Malachi Nelson, who is very impressive, by the way. But when I watch Moore, accuracy is easy for him, and he's not the biggest guy in the world. He's not as big as a Nico or a Malachi Nelson or even a Jaden Rashad. I think he's a little bit shorter than him. But when you watch him throw, he commands the field so well. And, I had the opportunity to hear a reporter asking Cam Newton about Dante Moore, what makes him such a great player? And he didn't go to the stuff on the field. He went straight to the stuff off the field, his poise, his leadership, and the way that he commands an offense. And I think he shows that, when he steps onto the field with his guys. And so I would take Dante Moore of the ones that Oregon is now going after. And, I'm with you, Max. I mean, there was a period not that long ago where I was more in on Rashada because I'm like, well, this is a California kid. Oregon's recruited out of that state before. He's probably, seen Oregon a little bit growing up. Dante Moore is from Detroit. I mean, there's just not that many big-time prospects that come out of Detroit, and the fact that Oregon is right here on a guy of that caliber But and also our Notre Dame friend is saying that Carr is a 2024 commit, not 2023. But it's still, I think it factors into that area. I think Notre Dame was the clear leader not that long ago, and it's kind of cooled off since then. So Oregon is very much in the mix, and that's the guy that I'd be going after. I think he's really impressive in a lot of ways. He's got a good, clean motion. He can make all the throws on the field. He's really accurate in the red zone too, and his ball placement is just phenomenal. On every throw that he makes, he's putting the ball in the right spot, and he doesn't miss very often. I mean, I watched him march his team down the field. I know it's 7-on-7, but I watched him march his team down the field. Only incompletion he had was a drop, and it was just boom, boom, boom. They scored in like 90 seconds or so, going 35, 40 yards in a 7-on-7 situation. So I'm really high on Dante Moore. I like what I saw from him quite a bit, and I think Oregon should go after him aggressively because he'd be a really good get.
Here's an interesting hypothetical to throw out there, Spencer. We already talked about the whole deal with when Rashada was still considering Oregon, how Avery Johnson's timing of his visit kind of made things a little tricky, right? So you got Dante Moore, who's obviously feeling the Ducks right now. They're definitely a serious contender. No commitment date of yet. Let's say, hypothetically, Oregon knocks this visit out of the park with Avery Johnson, and he wants to hop in the fold. You don't turn him away unless you feel real confident about where you stand with Dante Moore. Because the way things are going right now with quarterback recruiting, there's not a ton of really top-level guys that are left. Nico, Arch Manning's – Nico's already going to Tennessee. We obviously know that. Arch Manning's still on the market, but Oregon's not in the mix for him. Jaden Rashada is more or less eliminated Oregon, right, with those new finalists. But you want to get your quarterback in the fold, and if you don't get a guy like Avery Johnson or Dante Moore, your options are just getting really, really thin. So I think that's an interesting little wrinkle to throw into it here when you're looking at how Avery Johnson has a timeline. Dante Moore doesn't have as much of a timeline, at least not one that is known publicly right now. Correct me if I'm wrong, if someone's seen something, but I don't think he has a commitment date right now.
No, he doesn't. He's very, kind of open in his process from the point of view that he doesn't have a date. He's not narrowing a list. He's not doing anything of the sorts. He's not in a rush.
Okay, yeah. So it doesn't sound like he's in a rush, but Notre Dame's there. I think another school that is obviously in the mix is Michigan. They've really made a great impression on the recruiting trail with Dante Moore. So I just think that's an interesting kind of little situation to throw out there into the fold. If Avery Johnson really likes what he sees at Oregon and he's like, hey, I feel like this is the place for me. Do you take a commitment from him? We've talked about him being an awesome player, but if Moore's the guy that you want, you're kind of put in a tricky spot here. If Johnson wants to join the Ducks and they still want more, and they think that they have a really strong, if not the best shot at landing him, but I think it feels like Michigan's kind of in the driver's seat there, just from what we've seen, and kind of reading the tea leaves with Moore. Pretty quiet guy, doesn't talk to a ton of reporters, so I personally haven't been able to talk to him yet, which is kind of a bummer. But that's kind of the feel that I have on it right now. And who knows, even maybe this Texas A&M visit blows his mind, and then they're looking like they are in a good spot for him, because when they offered Rashada, they were also offering Pierce Clarkson, who's committed to Louisville. They were offering just so many quarterbacks, and it's Texas A&M. The way that they've been recruiting, one of the best classes I think ever in the history of 247, I believe, in that 2022 class. You're gonna listen.
I think it was the best.
Yeah, you're gonna listen if Texas A&M comes calling. They put themselves in a great spot with a lot of these great top level guys that are still on the market after losing the commitment from Eli Holstein, the Louisiana quarterback, who has since committed to Alabama and the Crimson Tide. So, man, this is a really interesting deal for Oregon right now when it comes to quarterback recruiting. But I would also kind of side with you as far as if you had your pick of the three guys, Dante Moore, Avery Johnson, and Ricky Collins. I feel like Dante's kind of that guy you want to go with. But I think whoever they end up getting, you want to get him as soon as you can. And I think we could really see that domino effect with just a bunch of big-time guys ready to kind of hop in the fold.
Yeah, I wonder if any defensive players are as drawn to it as offensive players would be, and that's been one of the impressive things about getting a guy like Jurion Dickey or Kyler Casper or Ashton Kozart is you're bringing in these athletes who project as good players and are highly sought after recruits, and you're doing it without a quarterback commit, and that's usually where coaching staffs go first because he's going to be the leader in theory of your team and the next starting quarterback. That tends to be the draw for other recruits, but Oregon hasn't needed that at this point in time. So I think that's good, and getting a quarterback would only bolster them from a recruiting standpoint. And I think that it just opens up a lot of possibilities because, I mean, we've been, at least I have been, I don't know if everyone feels this way, but I imagine we all are pleased so far with the recruiting job that Dan Lanning, Tosh Lupoy, Kenny Dillingham, Junior Adams, Carlos Locke, and everybody. I assume we're all content at this point in time with the job that they have done during this offseason, and they haven't even gotten the most important position yet. And so maybe there's another level that they can take and, make a step forward again if they're able to get a big time quarterback commit. But it's going to be tough for sure, because I'm sure Notre Dame is still in the running, but A&M's a recruiting power. Michigan, of course, off college football playoff appearance. I think that's going to be, some pretty stiff competition on the recruiting trail, but the staff was arguably assembled first and foremost to recruit. And so these are the sorts of battles you want to see them win.
So, yeah, I think we talked about those three guys. I feel like it's really probably down to Moore and Johnson right now, because you could talk about wanting to go to Oregon or being interested in Oregon, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't get out there. Now, at this point, after this weekend, Avery Johnson and Dante Moore will both have taken official visits, so we can see that strong mutual interest. Last thing I want to hit on here on the quarterback situation, and then I wanted to get to some questions that we got for you guys, some comments. Eric says, I want to plug and play 5-star. So let's just kind of take this into account with the current situation that Oregon has in the quarterback room. Bo Nix looks like he's going to be the guy. He has not been named the starter. I want to be very clear about that. The coaches have not named him the starter, but just look at all the factors that are going in. You guys are familiar with them. Probably didn't come to Oregon to sit and wait. Kind of a weird deal though, because he has 2 years of eligibility. And then you have some guys that look like they could be contributors with Ty Thompson and Jay Butterfield. I am in the camp that Jay Butterfield looks like he kind of pushed himself a little bit ahead of Ty after his performance at the spring game. Does that mean I'm not confident in Ty? Not at all. I'm just saying I feel like, for what it's worth, I think Jay proved himself as someone who's right there in the conversation for quarterback with Oregon. But it looks like it's going to be Bo. And, that's kind of what I feel like is going to happen just from what we've seen, what we've heard. But let's say that it's Bo, has 2 years left. I wonder what's going to happen if they do get a guy like Dante Moore, because it feels like, I haven't seen him in person, so maybe you can attest to this better than me. I didn't know that you were out there in Vegas until you came on the show. I'm very jealous, by the way. That would have been sick to be at.
It was fun. It was really fun.
But it feels like Dante is the guy more so than Avery that is maybe ready to play right away. Certainly has a little bit more of the college-ready body. So what do you think of this question from Eric wanting to plug and play 5-star? I think it'll certainly help Oregon, but I don't think that it's absolutely vital after what we saw from a Jay Butterfield at the spring game.
I think plug and play 5-stars are hard to come by at any position in terms of, put them in and have them be immediate impact guys, because you can put a 5-star in right away. Dante Manning is plug and play 5-star, but he hasn't had the sort of impact that we've been hoping at this point in time. I think Moore is a more refined passer than Avery Johnson at this point in time. That's the scouting report between the two of them, and Avery is certainly the better athlete. So in terms of which one could maybe come in and play right away, I think that depends a lot on Kenny Dillingham's offense, because if the quarterback's going to be asked to run, quite a bit, then maybe Moore has to come in and bulk. He's not a slenderly built guy, but maybe he just has to, learn the offense a little bit more and understand how to make those reads as a runner because he's a little bit more of just a pure thrower of the football. But maybe Dillingham can make that work. And he's not a bad athlete, but he's not at the level where Avery Johnson is. And, Johnson, a guy who is not going to wow you with his arm strength. He is a little bit slim. So maybe I think Moore is going to be a guy who's more prepared, no pun intended, to play sooner when he gets to campus, because Johnson, depending on how much he's able to bulk up this year for his final year of high school football, I think has some arm strength to add, and also has a little bit of passing refinement that he needs to undergo to reach his full potential as a quarterback. I assume that the question was asking purely about the quarterback position in terms of a plug and play 5-star, but I just think that it's easy to get enamored with these guys because they show so many great things. And as I said, I'm really impressed with Dante Moore and what I've seen and having talked to him, and the way Cam Newton talked about him as well. There was just a lot of stuff to like there. But if he were to commit to Oregon, would I say that he needs to be the starter immediately in 2023? No, not necessarily. I think that it's an option, and if he's ready and he's the best quarterback who's going to give you the best chance to win, then go for it. But if he's not, then I don't see the benefit of putting a guy out there just because he was a big time recruit. Ty Thompson was a big time recruit. If we'd put him on the field as a starter last year, what's Oregon, a 7-5 team? Probably. I mean, like he's not ready to play at this point in time. So you can't always know that stuff too until you see them in practice once they get there. And because another thing you have to remember, not everybody's ready to play right away. Herbert did not play right away. He took over mid-season. He had
because he had
good,
to.
Well, yeah, but he had a good amount of growth that he had to undergo that he ultimately, was able to successfully do by the time he was a senior, and he was a better quarterback. But he didn't play right away. And Mariota, by the way, sat for an entire year. The best player in the history of the program. See how I got that pronunciation right the first time, Max? That's because I'm just a little bit more dedicated than you. I'm just kidding. But the best player in the history of the program sat for an entire year. And so this expectation of, no, I want a guy who's going to be able to come in and start right away. Like, maybe Mariota doesn't become Mariota if he has to come in and play right away. But the good news is he didn't have to. And we had a really good quarterback there in Darren Thomas ahead of him. So I think that expectation is a little bit misguided of, I want to plug and play 5-star. Like, if a guy is good enough to do that, like a Trevor Lawrence, then great. That's fantastic. Then throw him in there and let him make some mistakes, but also let him showcase his talents and whatnot. But if he's not ready, I don't see why you need to rush the process.
Yeah, fair point. I think the last point that I want to have here on just the quarterback picture in 23, and then obviously this directly affects Oregon's current quarterback picture. I feel like I've kind of been going back and forth a little bit on the transfer portal with quarterbacks. I think that they're the most volatile position in college football, right? I think that there was already the narrative there. If I can't play right away, I'm going to go somewhere else. That doesn't apply to every quarterback by any means. I think, you see Ty Thompson still at Oregon, which is a good sign for the Ducks. But I've kind of been bouncing back and forth as far as just what approach is healthier for the long term with the program. Is do you want to go the high school route, or does it matter? If you have a guy in the portal that can come in and just light the world on fire, like Jalen Hurts transferring from Bama to Oklahoma, do you just take that risk and get a transfer guy? And then, I mean, let's be real. I feel like, I don't know if you want to say stifle the development of your prep guys or your younger guys, because you just talked yourself. You just made a really good point about how it might have been better that Mariota didn't play right away at Oregon. But for Oregon, they're in a tricky spot because you've taken the gamble on these transfer quarterbacks so much, like I think too much in my opinion. But you've had some that worked out. Look at Vernon Adams. If he didn't get hurt, who knows where Oregon would have.
That's a college football playoff team. I've made that claim time and again. I will make it till the end of time. Vernon Adams doesn't hurt his finger. I think they not only beat Michigan State, I think they, even if they lose Michigan State, it might still be a college football playoff team, but I think they probably win that game. He doesn't hurt his finger. That team goes back to the playoff. It was loaded.
Yeah. So, and then here's Mikey G's kind of echoing my kind of conundrum, I guess. Long term doesn't really seem to be a thing anymore. You have to win and win now. Too much on the line. Not the last of which our coach, least of which our coaching jobs.
Least of which, yeah.
Might have a little typo there, but I just feel like for Oregon, yeah, you want to win now, but they've been taking transfers so often right now that the last prep guy that we got to see was Tyler Shuck, who had his moments but was very up and down, and then Herbert only got on the field because Dakota Prukop was a nightmare. I mean, let's just call it what it was.
He wasn't a nightmare. He just wasn't that good. He wasn't that bad.
I mean, Herbert was on the field because of necessity.
Let's save the word nightmare for Braxton Burmeister at quarterback.
Sure.
Okay, that was a nightmare. Dakota Prukop wasn't a nightmare. He just was like, okay.
And yeah, he very mediocre. Maybe that's a better
like when the season was going the way it was. Yeah, it was time to make the switch. Like that was the right thing to do because you didn't have anything to lose at that point in time. But he wasn't like all bad. But anyway, finish your point.
Yeah, so I think I'm kind of going back and forth as far as the transfer portal goes, but I think I feel like for how I've seen Oregon play, where I've seen them go, I would personally like to see them. Okay, yeah, Mikey G. I also mentioned Shuck. I don't know. It was definitely deer in the headlights a lot of the times with Shuck. I don't know.
He wasn't a nightmare.
I don't think I called him a nightmare. I said that about Prukop, but I'm dialing it back a little bit. Maybe that was a little bit too harsh of a word to say, but yeah, I think ideally if Bo is the starter, he plays one season, then he makes his best shot at the NFL, right? And then you have a chance to work from Ty Thompson, Jay Butterfield, and whoever you get in 23, right? I think that's kind of an ideal situation for Oregon. Because you want to have one of these prep guys get a shot. I feel like that's kind of what they need right now. So that's kind of the last thing that I wanted to say as far as the quarterback conversation. They're still in the running for some really good guys, but I'd personally like to see them maybe not go the transfer portal route as much as they have in the past. Although, admittedly, I think it was the right move with the situation that they currently had because the quarterbacks that they had on the roster when this new staff came in hadn't played any football. Who wants to start their season with a completely unproven quarterback room? As appealing as the potential might be, I think it was the smart move and the safe move to get a transfer guy that has proven he can play at a high level.
So I understand the general sentiment, and I've seen this from Oregon fans on my show and all over the place as well. It's totally understandable about people want a homegrown quarterback, right? It feels more authentic. It does give you a long-term solution, right? Because if you're doing it right, then a guy's going to start for you for at least 2, if not 3, or in Herbert's case 4 years. Unfortunately, one of them, of course, cut short by an injury because we were running the ball with our quarterback inside the 5-yard line with Royce Freeman in the backfield for reasons that I still can't figure out. Anyway, I'm over it. I think that the desire for that is very fair. But when you look at Oregon, I think right now, the Bo Nix coming in was a perfect storm because I think if Cristobal and that staff had stayed, I don't think they go the transfer route. I think they choose between Ty and Jay, but they just felt that they were not ready a season to go, which they were not. And one guy's asked a question, or I guess made the comment that I want to push back on here. He said, Ty proved he was better than AB last year in the Stony Brook game. I just hope Bo is no longer Bo. No, but spring game says he's not improved from his bad decisions. So here's a couple of things there. Last year, I know Anthony Brown was not good. It was frustrating to watch at times because he would make some really bad throws. However, he was still better than what Ty Thompson was a season ago because he was not ready. Now, if you want to put that on the coaching staff for not being able to develop him to the point or have him in a place as a quarterback where he is able to showcase his full array of talents, that's an understandable and I think fair probably correct criticism, especially now that what we've seen with Herbert in the NFL compared to what he was in college. I think that's totally valid there. But Ty Thompson, the limited stuff that we saw, he did not look ready. His pocket presence wasn't there. He didn't make great reads. He does have the big arm, but the Colorado game even, right? Ty Thompson went into the game, but then Anthony Brown had to come back in to save and make sure that it was going to be a win. That's a moment where if you're really that close to the guy ahead of you, he doesn't have to come back into the game to save it. But Ty, was a little shaky. He threw a really bad interception where he made a bad read, then forced a throw and threw it behind. Like, just all freshman growing pains and mistakes that you expect a young quarterback to make. And I'm not going out here and saying Anthony Brown was good. He was not. But if you start Ty Thompson last year and don't play Anthony Brown, you do not beat Ohio State, and you certainly do not win 10 games and get to the Pac-12 championship game. That's maybe an 8-win season at best, based on what we've seen, because Brown was a much better runner than Ty Thompson is, and that was a big part of what Moorhead wanted to do offensively. And then the second part of the comment there, hope that Bo is no longer Bo No, but Spring Game says he's not improved. So he does have this reputation, Bo Nix, and he has earned it in his career at Auburn of, being a guy who can be a little reckless, who can turn the ball over and make a bad decision. The interception he threw was bad. I don't expect him to completely get rid of that. I'll just throw this statistic out there at you. He was only completing about 62% of his passes before he got injured this past season at Auburn. His touchdown to interception ratio was almost 4-1. If he comes to Oregon this year and his TD to interception ratio is almost 4-1, I will be thrilled if we get that version of Bo Nix. So I think he has done some maturing from when we first saw him as a freshman down at Jerry's World at the neutral site game. But I just think that you have to consider a lot of things when looking at a quarterback and how ready he is to play, because Ty Thompson clearly was not. Now, should Ty Thompson have played in the bowl game? Yeah, that was I was screaming for that on my couch too, Duck fans. That was pretty infuriating. You had a staff that had gone, like, the second half of the Pac-12 championship game, even there was no reason to put Anthony Brown out. Like, how could it possibly have gotten worse? So I agree there were moments where he should have seen the field and gotten some reps and had the chance to show what he could do. But the few opportunities we did see of that, I wouldn't say he lit it up to the point where I was like, oh, maybe we should just go ahead and start him, because he came in, he looked really raw, and I didn't want it to be Anthony Brown, but he was the best option it looked like we had at the time. And, we didn't see a lot of Butterfield either last season, or I don't think we saw even any of Jay Butterfield hardly. I think we've just seen him in the spring game. I could be wrong on that, but I think there's a lot of things you have to consider. And just because a guy's a highly rated quarterback recruit doesn't mean he's ready to hit his ceiling as a player. And I think rushing him into action there is a mistake.
Yeah, I think another thing too, that maybe one of the points that I would throw out there, just to wrap up this conversation before we get to some other questions. I mean, hey, stuff always gets crazy when we talk about quarterbacks, right? It's the most important position on the field, and I think the recent play from Oregon has left a little bit to be desired, to put it kindly. I mean, as bad as Anthony Brown was at times last year, I think he does get more criticism than he probably deserved. He led the Pac-12 in passing. I mean, I think that says a couple different things. I talks about the quality of quarterbacks in the conference, but maybe he didn't perform as poorly as some people thought. They still won 10 games, right? But we don't have to talk about him too much because he's not here anymore. And now we're focused on 2022 and beyond. I think for as little action as Jay Butterfield has seen, I think he looks a little bit better than Ty right now. But I mean, maybe we could see things change after fall camp, and maybe we see some of these other guys that aren't named Bo Nix get some snaps in that non-conference slate. But I saw a comment about Ty maybe getting his first start against Georgia, which is definitely a tough deal. But
yeah, you can't throw a kid into the fire like that. That's not going to do anything for him. That's just going to shatter his confidence. You're playing a road game at the defending national champs who have lost a lot of players, sure, but they're still loaded with 5 stars on that defense. They still have Kirby Smart as their head coach. That's not a game where you want Ty Thompson to have to go out there and start. That's asking way too much.
All right, yeah.
I mean, Mariota's first game was against Arkansas State. That was a nice layup to introduce him to college football, and then everything took off. He surely would have been good anyway, of course, but I'd rather have his first start come against an opponent that's not Georgia on the road.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I mean, quarterback's going to be a fun position to watch for Oregon, and then a lot of new faces in the Pac-12 as well. You got Caleb Williams at SC, you got Emory Jones at ASU, Jaden DeLora moving to Arizona. I think that's kind of one of my favorite moves of the offseason in the Pac-12. But let's switch it up and get into a little bit of the mailbag, live viewer questions, because I want to get you guys more involved. And then Spencer, let me know on time. I mean, maybe like 15 or 20 minutes. This is like the longest show I've done, to be honest. But I'm really digging it and having a good time. Where are you at with time?
I don't have a social life. Duck fans are my social life.
Okay, fair enough. I know I have some other things I need to get to today, like that visitor list story for this weekend that I alluded to earlier. But let's try to get to some of these. And so just another call to action for you guys. If you got questions, throw them at us in the comments. This one, I put out a call to action on Twitter about questions for this, and my guy Mikey G tweeted at me with a fun question. He said, "Which Dan would you most want to have a beer with? Dan Fouts, Danny O'Neill, or Dan Lanning? #DucksDish." Big thank you for throwing the hashtag on there as we continue to push out the brand and building up the podcast. I think I'm dating myself a little bit here because I didn't know who Danny O'Neill was when I first read the question. I know that Dan Fouts is a legendary Oregon quarterback, but I don't know. I'd just be fun to get to know Dan Lanning a little bit more, as the new head coach at Oregon. So maybe a basic answer, but I'm going to go with Dan Lanning. Maybe you have a different answer because you've been following the Ducks for a while, Spencer. What do you think?
I'm not trying to cast aspersions at the new leader of our program here, but I'm going to go with Dan Fouts. I do Locked on Ducks and Locked on Pac-12 as well. But for those of you who don't know, my other job is I'm a play-by-play guy. So, Dan Fouts has done a lot of games on CBS for the NFL for a long time. He's a great analyst too. He does a lot of games with Ian Eagle, who is tremendous as a play-by-play guy. So I think for me personally, I'd go with Fouts because you got the Oregon connection. I'd want to ask him about all that sort of stuff and, the growth of the program now and everything that's gone on there. But, I'd want to pick his brain about broadcasting as well and what it's like to be up in that booth and what his preparation looks like. So I'd go with Dan Fouts. I'd enjoy getting a beer with any of those guys or just like talking to any of them for, I don't know, 5 minutes. But if we were able to sit down and do it and I had my choice, I'd go with Dan Fouts.
Okay. All right. Dan Fouts. There we go. Okay. So we have, it's nice to have different answers here. I've been kind of scrolling back through because we were getting a lot of questions before we got to this portion of the show. So you guys have to bear with me. So I can find it. Sorry about this. Just bear with me while I look for this question because I know which one I'm thinking about, but I just want to get it here so we can have it on the screen. You guys have been awesome. Just throwing the comments and questions our way throughout the show because it was a Mario Cristobal and Dan Lanning comparison question that I thought was really interesting.
Okay, was it the one about who's getting to the playoff first, Cristobal at Miami or Lanning at Oregon?
Yeah, I think that's what it was. I was just trying to confirm what the actual question was. Shoot, I know I had it, man.
I think that was the question. I remember.
Now, of course, I can't find it. But yeah, let's go there. Yeah. So two head coaches in new places. Mario Cristobal goes back home to Coral Gables to head up the Canes program, try to restore them to their former glory. Things have not been going well for them in the ACC, which I think is one of the weaker Power 5 conferences, but I think we'll be in agreement when we say that the Pac-12 is the worst of the 5 Power 5 conferences. Yeah. So who's more likely to make it to the playoffs? Is it going to be Mario Cristobal or Dan Lanning? I think I'm going to go Lanning, even though he's a first-time head coach. I don't think that we've necessarily seen the on-field, coaching acumen from Cristobal as much as we want to. During his time at Oregon, the trench play was awesome on the offensive side of the ball, but I don't know. I feel like it was kind of trending in the direction with college football that you just have to have an offense that can score more points than the next. But Georgia showed us that defense does in fact still win championships, and I think that Dan Lanning has inspired a lot of confidence and being able to get the most out of this Oregon roster, and not only that, keep it stocked with just tons of options. I think that Dan Lanning inherits a better situation than Mario Cristobal. I don't feel like that's too crazy to say. Things have just not been going well for Miami, and has a better roster. I think Oregon has a better roster. That's not too crazy to say either. I don't know why I keep just watering down my takes. I need to stop saying that. But I think I'm going to go with Dan Lanning, even though he's a first-year head coach. I think that the Pac-12 is maybe a little bit more winnable since you don't have to go up against a team like Clemson. Sure, there's USC that has all the hype in the world, but they haven't done a dang thing as far as on-field production since Lincoln Riley took over, but that's not their fault. They haven't played anything yet, but Oregon is more of a sure product right now than USC is because we haven't had a game yet in the 2022 season.
Yeah, I got to give a quick shout out to our guy Andrew in the chat here. That guy is not pulling any punches, and I'm so here for it. I've been seeing your comments, Andrew, and I love it. So I think Mario Cristobal and Lincoln Riley are actually in really similar spots. They're going to take over big time coastal programs who have been at the focal point, at the epicenter of college football in their heyday, and they're trying to get back there. And that is exactly why each coach was hired to their respective schools. However, the reason that I'd agree with you, Max, about it being Lanning at Oregon before Cristobal at Miami is because Cristobal has the same challenge that Lincoln Riley has. You have to build it back up. It is down. Oregon is off of a disappointing 10-win season. Any Miami fan right now would pay a lot of NIL money to go under the table or be above the table or whatever, to have a disappointing 10-win season and to be in that place as a program. And so, we know that Cristobal is capable of recruiting, changing a roster, bringing in big-time players, and changing a culture around a program as well. We saw him do that over the last 4 seasons as the head coach with the Ducks. But that stuff takes time. I mean, think back to Cristobal's first year as the head coach. It was a 9-4 season, which was a good year. But then it was the next year where Oregon was able to make a jump, right? Where they then got to the Rose Bowl and were within probably, a 3rd and 16 stop of perhaps getting to the college football playoff and such. So that sort of stuff takes more time, and you have to turn it around. And I think Cristobal is capable of doing that, even though schematically he may be limited in college football. Recruiting is 70-80% of the battle. I mean, I'm pretty sure the only reason Oregon won 10 games a season ago is because the offensive line was just better than everybody on the other side. That is basically it. I mean, if you make Oregon's offensive line average in the Pac-12, it's probably an 8-win team. But because it was well above average, it was a 10-win team. And so I think that it's just, Oregon as a program is further along in that development of getting to that level than Miami is. And so we still have to see whether or not Dan Lanning has the chops to be a head coach. And the early indicators are that he does, but you have to do it on the field at some point. You can't just win recruiting battles, though those are important. You have to be able to show up on Saturdays and be able to win. And, the idea that Oregon's going to be a defensively oriented team, I understand that, and I think that's probably true. But just keep in mind, Nick Saban's a defensive head coach too. And when they won the national championship 2 years ago, and when they got to the national championship last year, whomst among us would say it was the defense driving the team to that spot? It was Mac Jones with Devontae Smith, 2 of the 3 Heisman finalists. And then these past couple of years, it's been Bryce Young and all the guys they've had, and the John Mechie's and Jamison Williams and Najee Harris's of the world, and all those sorts of guys. So just because you have a defensive head coach doesn't mean you can't be really good offensively. But I think that between those two schools, Oregon and Miami, the Ducks are further along in terms of the roster and the potential to be that sort of team. And Miami's just probably a couple of years away if Mario recruits the way we expect him to, and it looks like he is.
Yeah, I think I feel like I've said this too. Like I think one of my mistakes as a writer last year was watering down some of my takes more than I wanted to when Oregon wasn't performing up to the standard. And I don't want to just sound like I'm bashing Mario because that's not the case at all. He's the only coach that I've ever covered. So I think I'm learning a lot as I go here. But we saw how far recruiting can take you in a good way and in a bad way. We saw the limitations that it presents. You can have awesome recruits all you want, but if those guys can't contribute when it matters most, when you're going up against the Ohio States of the world, when you're going up against Utah, who is still criminally underrated, in my opinion, even after winning the Pac-12 title, like they are here to stay. I thought there was some chatter that Kyle Whittingham was going to retire after last season, but I don't believe that's the case anymore. And I think that he's really got a really rock solid blueprint in place there. So the fact that we didn't see those adjustments was against in both Utah games was just ridiculous. But I want to acknowledge D-Rock Irish's comment here. Miami has to go through North Carolina State, North Carolina, and Clemson. He says, I think it will be landing at the Pac-12 in the Pac-12 over Cristobal at Miami. So I feel like we're both kind of on the same page here. I think it's still a good question because
it is.
Mario has Mario and Lenny both have awesome track records with recruiting, but I think that even though Danny Lanning, like you're saying, like even though Lanning's a defensive head coach, like look at the pieces they have in place on offense, both with players, with coaches. Junior Adams, I think it's every time I hear about the guy now, it's just rave reviews, even though we haven't seen it yet necessarily at Oregon, aside from the spring game. He's, just getting all these huge receivers now that he has a brand like Oregon behind him to recruit with. I think that's a big part of it. Kenny Dillingham, a little bit more of an unproven coach just because he's so young, but there was obviously some very encouraging signs from his time at Memphis and at Florida State. So definitely some reason to be excited there. But I think that's a great question that I'm glad we got to hit on here. There's another one that I wanted to get to here, so let me just scroll up to find it. I know I
do want to make one comment on D-Rock Irish's comment about Miami's got to go through NC State, North Carolina, and Clemson. I wouldn't exactly consider that a gauntlet of college football teams. I mean, that's pretty comparable. I think if you're looking at the path in terms of what teams you have to go through in your conference, it's probably easier at Miami going forward now that Lincoln Riley's at USC. Like you're talking 2 years from now, maybe even this year. I think we'll see. I think the Trojans could maybe go 10-2 because their schedule is pretty easy. They don't have that many tough. I think they only have 3 games where you could look at and go like, oh, I think they would probably lose that game. But again, they're in 2 years, it's not going to be that way. I don't imagine. And I mean, the ACC is a step above the Pac-12, but it's more like a baby step than a flight of stairs.
Because I did my first episode of the Pac-12 Takeover podcast, my Pac-12 podcast. We both have Pac-12 podcasts, which is cool. I preview USC, and I said 8-4 as my record prediction. And then you have USC fans coming at me like, "Are you kidding me? 10-2, 11-1." I'm like, you have so much that you have to change. Like you can only overhaul so much in one off season. Like I agree that there's reason for optimism, but I mean, come on, like how much do you think they're going to feel like pump the brakes on them being like a playoff contender in their first year?
No, I don't see playoff contender there, but I don't know if I could go 8-4 because here's the thing. Their schedule, like I said, is not very hard. I mean, they're non-conference. They open with rice, which is a type of food. So like that's a win. I think they're favored by 35. That's a win. I don't remember. I'd have to look at. Actually, I want to look that up now. Their non-conference is not very hard, and when you look at their schedule, you only really see, I think, 3 games where you could where you'd go into it saying, oh yeah, they're probably going to lose it. They go Rice, they get Fresno State at home, and then their other non-conference is Notre Dame. And they get Notre Dame at home as well. But they have to go at Utah and at UCLA. To me, those are games that I very easily see them losing. I think between UCLA, Utah, and Notre Dame, you've got 3 games where the Trojans could pretty reasonably lose, and it wouldn't be that surprising. However, do I think they're going to lose all of them? Probably not. I bet they go 1-2. I think we need to see, how teams are playing and how they're looking this year to figure out, what that one win might be. But getting 2 of those or having 2 of those games on the road makes it tougher for them. But the reason I have them at 9-3 is like I look at those 3 games and I'm like, okay, they're probably going to win 1, and then I bet you they lose a game somewhere that we don't expect them to, because you never or almost never win every game that you're expected to. I mean, who picked Alabama to lose to Texas A&M last year? And that's Alabama. And this is a 1 year, a takeover at this point in time for Lincoln Riley and USC. And they do have a lot of things to change from a roster and a cultural standpoint. And so I think they'll be able to score plenty of points. I mean, they didn't struggle to do that a season ago, and their offensive line has some decent pieces. I think their defense is, where the questions are. The secondary and the defensive line in particular are, I think, probably the biggest glaring weaknesses of the team at this point in time. And so I just look at a team like Utah or UCLA, and I'm like, they might be able to just kind of run all over them. And so you're going to be in shootouts there potentially. And so I think USC will be good. I'd be surprised if they go 8-4, because I think that means you're losing those 3 games and then another one to maybe like a Wazoo or a Stanford. And I think that's unlikely, though not impossible, but they'll be well over 500.
Oh, no doubt. Definitely over 500. Yeah, I think the games against Notre Dame and Utah are the 2 most likely losses that I see. I'm not saying that they're blowouts, but I don't have as hard of a time as projecting those as possible losses. UCLA, I mean, anytime you play UCLA, like that's still kind of a home game, even if you have to go to the Rose Bowl. Those are the USC fans are probably going to show up for that game. But
True. That's
the
true.
other loss that I could potentially see that you didn't mention too much, not to talk too much about USC here, but I think we're having some good broader talk. Oregon State, they got to go up to Corvallis, man, and they're really finding their footing under Jonathan Smith. I think
agree.
that they're probably the most likely number 2 team in the North right now.
And they beat
the
and they did beat USC a season ago, though it's a different team. And there is history of USC struggling at Oregon State. And I know it's a completely different team and it was a long time ago, but that sort of stuff matters in Corvallis. Like we all know that sort of stuff matters. Like Oregon and Stanford play crazy games. Just happens. When we go down to the desert, weird stuff tends to happen. It all started with Dennis Dixon's knee, but it's been one thing after another where we've just dropped some duds in the desert for no reason in particular, just the way that sports work out sometime. The thing that you have to remember with Oregon State, though, is their stadium is going to be, I think, like 25-ish% capacity this year because they're remodeling Reser, right? They tore it down and they blew it up and everything. And there was that hilarious playful jab from Utah State because they posted the video of Oregon State did of blowing up the stands essentially and like starting it all over, and it was after they'd lost to the Aggies in the bowl game, and Utah State football said, "Geez, guys, it was just a bowl game." I thought that was pretty darn good, but having a limited crowd, I don't think you can take that lightly when you're talking about trying to beat Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams there. And, I know that Corvallis fans are going to pack it as much as they can, but not being able to have a full consortium of fans there, I think is going to have an impact as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. But I think even if they can't have all that crowd there, like the energy around it is just they're doing things the right way. And I mean, they're a school that definitely needs that some positive on-field results. But I'm excited about them this year, without a doubt. We're definitely getting some funny comments is probably what you're laughing at.
Yeah, the North and South. Also, peace out, D-Rock Irish. Always happy to have fans of other teams in there. But yeah, Dwayne said I thought there were no more North and South, and Mikey G said geographically North and South, so North and South still exists. To answer your question, Dwayne, North and South are still in place as Pac-12 divisions for now. They just don't matter anymore. You're going to take the two teams with the highest conference winning percentage and put them in the championship game in Las Vegas this December, where I hope to be going once again. And I think eventually you'll see the divisions go away. But right now there's a scheduling structure to how divisions factor into the way that teams figure out who they're going to play. And so I think they're just keeping that for now until they figure out what sort of scheduling model they want to go to in the future.
Yeah. And then just to answer Dwayne's question, when does fall camp start? No official date yet, but last year it was like mid-August, mid to early August, I think is what it was. So we'll keep you guys updated on when that officially comes in. The last question that I want to answer for today, let me scroll back and find it because I keep scrolling too much, was a recruiting question that I'm pretty excited about. So give me a second to find this here because it's going to be easier to find than the last one. So let's see. Come on. I literally just saw it not too long ago. Why does this keep happening to me?
Andrew, I think we're allowed to refer to it as the game formerly known as the Civil War, because then you're not calling it that. You're saying it was formerly known as that, which is very true. So I wonder if that's okay.
I got you. Yeah, we're still waiting for a new name for that, but the rivalry game, I don't know. We'll see what they end up officially calling it. Hopefully they come out with something for it this year. That one always coming after Thanksgiving. Gary's question here: 5-star Richard Young is going on a visit next week into Oregon. What is the chance that Oregon lands him? I think that much like Dante Moore, I think that Richard Young has become much more of a realistic possibility for Oregon. Anytime you pull a guy all the way out from Florida, it's going to be really tough. He's been to Florida so many times on visits. I feel like the other two schools to watch here have to be Alabama and Florida. I believe he's taking his Georgia official right now, if that's correct. Yeah, it looks like he is indeed in Athens for his official visit this weekend. So defending national champions, they're obviously going to be able to give him a great pitch. But I know that Carlos Laughlin's done a good job in this recruitment, and he's another guy that came out for an unofficial on his own dime earlier this spring. So I feel like they have a really good chance here. Maybe I shouldn't say really good. A realistic chance, I think, is maybe a better answer. You had another guy, Jeremiah Love, a running back out of Missouri that was recently on campus. I know the Ducks really like him. So Richard Young is going to be a big name to watch for Oregon with that big visit coming up next weekend. No decision date yet, but man, being able to pair Richard Young with Dante Dowdell would be pretty insane. I think that if they aren't able to get Richard Young, you definitely want to have a guy that can kind of be a good thunder and lightning complement to Dowdell.
Yeah, and I think Oregon's got plenty of those sorts of backs. And if Richard Young were to commit to Oregon, then prior to the 2023 season, we would have some transfers out of the backfield because there'd just be too many guys there. I would love to get Richard Young. Don't get me wrong. I just don't see how we can make the best pitch to him at this point in time, because you look at the guys that Oregon has brought in. Bucky Irving from Minnesota. All right, so he has played 1 year of college football. He's got 3 left. And then Noah Whittington has played 1 year of college football, so he's got 3 left. And Byron Cardwell has played 1 year of college, so he's got 3. Like, there are just so many bodies in that room who could be there for a good amount of time. Now, if Dollars has a big year in pops, maybe he decides to go to the NFL and that opens up a slot. But you've got Dowdell. You have to remember Jordan James is in that mix as well. So I just think there's so many guys there that, would Young be the most talented of them? Probably. Yeah, I think he's a little bit faster, a little bit more agile version of Dante Dowdell, who I think is a Royce Freeman style of runner. But I just would be surprised if Oregon got him, because I don't know the situation of every other running back room of the schools that he's considering, but I think in short order, Carlos Lachlan and his staff have really shored up the running back position for the next, a couple years, because they've brought in all this talent, but they've brought in young guys as well. I mean, who's the most experienced ball carrier that Oregon has right now? Byron Cardwell, who went into last season as a number 3, because it's not Sean Dollars.
Bucky Irving, maybe.
Yeah, it's probably Bucky Irving. So a guy who has played 1 year of college football. And, from one standpoint, that's exciting. From another, it's, maybe a little bit more of a question mark than we're thinking. I mean, I like what Cardwell shows. I love Dollars the most. And then all the other guys, I've talked about them on my show. I think they all show some really, really good qualities there. But the room is just so crowded. And, John Garcia, director of recruiting for SI, has told me that he's talked with Richard before, and from what he understands, that he's not the sort of guy who's going to be turned away by competition. But I just look at it from a volume standpoint, and that's just a lot of guys who could be on campus for several years, 2 of whom are transfers and would have to get waivers or have to sit out a year if they were going to leave again. So, obviously you're going after the best players you can find, but running back tends to be a position where you come in, if you're a highly rated recruit, you play right away, like Royce Freeman did, like Thomas Tyner did, like LaMichael did when he was a freshman as well. And, I just think that's well, he got the opportunity after Blunt punched the guy, of course, but but the point stands. That's not one that typically needs a ton of development. You typically play right away. So I'd be surprised if he comes to Oregon, but it'd be a welcome surprise for sure.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a similar situation. I liken it to maybe like a David Hicks situation where like the Ducks have a shot, but I don't think that they're leaders right now. I would probably say I'm more confident in David Hicks maybe than Richard Young. It's tough. I mean, I just got back from my trip. So
I'd rather have Hicks than Young. Like if I had to choose between those two,
there's not as much of a need.
Yeah, it's not as much of a need. Defensive line 100% is, because Dorless is gone after this year. I think Popo's got one more, doesn't he?
No, he's a 2017 guy. This will be his last one.
Okay, so Popo and Dorless are gone, so you're gonna have a big need on the interior of that defensive line. If I were the Oregon staff, I'd say, look, Richard, if this is the place you really want to come, then by all means, let's do it. But I think if you're talking about where you're going to put your efforts right now on the recruiting trail, I think you go to a guy like Hicks or David Wayne or Jaden Wayne or Mateo Uiagalelei.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think you certainly just want to stack that room, any room, with as much talent as you possibly can. Yeah. But running back is a room that has always been stacked, and there hasn't been this much of an opportunity for a new guy to emerge in 4-5 years at Oregon, just because it's always been Travis Dye and CJ Riddell for the past while. So yep. I'm gonna actually write a new feature just about how open the running back room is at Oregon. But man, we're almost at 2 hours for this one, but I think we're gonna wind down here on this episode of the pod. Before we get out of here, Spencer, just want to give you a chance to plug, where people can find you and more of your work, because we love having you on.
Yeah, of course. By the way, Andrew, the game formerly known as the Civil War was on ESPN this past year. And I think kind of usually is on the past. It's been on Pac-12 before, but it was on ESPN this past year. I just saw that. But yeah, at Smalls_55 is my Twitter handle. At Locked On Ducks is the Twitter account for my show. And, pumping out plenty of content over there. A little bit more lax during the summer months, since, news and information and storylines and whatnot are not quite as free flowing. But during the season, starting back up in August, it's every day, and I try to put out as much as I can during the summer months. And it's on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcasts as well. Max comes on probably a couple times a month, but a lot of it is just it's just me talking over there. I have other guests who come on the show as well. John Garcia is great. He comes on every week. We talk about all these sorts of recruits. But yeah, man, it was fun to come on, and I'd love to do it again. And by the way, thank all of you for being active and engaging in the comments. It makes it a lot more fun for us when you're a part of the show, and we can just answer, directly what's on your mind. And you can send me questions as well, get them answered on my show. This time of year, definitely open to that sort of stuff. So by all means, find a way to reach out, ask a question about the Ducks or anything else, frankly, and I'll probably give you an answer. But Max, this was a ton of fun, man. We got to do it again.
Yeah, no, we absolutely have to, and we will. Big thank you to Spencer for coming on. If you guys want to find more of me, you can follow me on Twitter at mtorresports, that name right there on your screen. You can find more of my written content, which often includes the latest recruiting insider interviews with some of Oregon's top targets on the recruiting trail. And then obviously we're going to have football coming up here before you guys know it in August. So definitely check out and subscribe to ducksdigest.com. And then kindly ask that you like and subscribe to my YouTube channel here at Oregon Football Max Torres. And then big favor to ask you guys, just share the show, share it with fans, family, just anyone you can. We're really just trying to grow the show, grow the community. Really appreciate all the support from everyone. Had an absolute blast on this episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. We'll be back again. I'm going to try to go tomorrow. Why not? For another episode. But appreciate everyone tuning in. And we will catch you guys in the next episode. Take care.